listening to CaveRadioBroadcasting.com. The words and opinions you are about to hear are of the hosts and do not reflect the management of CaveRadioBroadcasting.com.
Good afternoon and welcome to Down the Rabbit Hole. Today is Year of Our Lord. Oh, I messed it up, so I got a text from Hooper. I'm sorry. Today is Thursday, January 6th, 5th. We already got a caller?
Oh, did Hooper find the number?
Yeah, he was just
What's that?
texting me.
Is this Hooper?
It is he. Dave, how's it going, buddy?
Hey, what's up, man? I was just responding to your text, but you got the number, so you're good.
Yeah, I did.
Cool.
I went looking on their brand new site. It wasn't visible, but I've got it in like 20 places. So.
All right, cool.
All right.
Did they already start the intro?
Kind of.
You interrupted it.
Yeah.
Pretty much. So goodbye 2016. You sucked, and I am glad you're gone. I'm looking forward to a prosperous and peaceful 2017.
A less shitty 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there was a lot of bad, but I try to be the optimist. There was good stuff in 2016.
Yeah, optimism is my job. 2016 sucked.
Okay, well, that's so now we got like this neutrality. So it just canceled each other out. So it doesn't matter. So here we are, 2017.
2017. We're going to have a new president inaugurated in a few weeks. The 45th president.
We hope.
Well, very interesting.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that, but 45th president.
45th. I think there might be some extra meaning behind the
There
45th
might be. There might
president.
be. And it might also be something to the fact that it's going from the 44th to the 45th. Just saying. We'll get to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw, doing research for the show, I saw something really interesting, and someone was likening the Four Horsemen to events that have happened, and the one thing, the number one horse, the pale horse, or no, whatever the first horse was, in this guy's particular analogy, he finds it interesting that Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize when there's been more war in the world during his presidency than ever in the history of ever.
Well, we all know that was a joke. So,
yeah, but does he? I think he thinks it's real.
Do we even know what he won that for?
I thought it was a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, but I mean, there's got to be I
don't know.
You don't just win one because you're cool. I mean, or maybe you do.
I don't. You don't just win one. I don't think he's that cool.
Or maybe you do.
Why are we?
I don't. You don't just win one. I don't think he's that cool.
It's
or maybe you do.
Hooper.
Hang up on him.
Yeah, it's because
he's
Hooper
listening.
Was having it listened while he was. Sleeping.
He's an amateur caller.
Yeah, we got to get some.
Don't
phones.
people know you can't listen while you're on the phone with a radio station?
Yeah.
It's 2017.
Right.
Isn't that the argument for everything?
Right. I mean, if someone did that in 2016, I would understand.
2010, I give him a break.
But it's 2017.
He doesn't even come from a divorced family. What's his problem?
Oh, here he comes again.
That's my excuse.
Doesn't cover a divorced family.
When I'm late for meetings.
Hey, between the three of us, we got the dynamic covered.
Yeah.
Single mother, your divorced family, and
Yeah.
he's
when I'm late for
family.
when I'm late for meetings, like, oh, nice for you to show up on time. I'm like, you know what? Come from a divorced family. Give me a break. So, I don't know why he even won it. I'm
going to look that up right now.
I don't really care. It's whatever. Can't go away fast enough. I don't wish any harm on the guy, but
well, he's certainly done enough harm to us, right?
Well, that's fine. I just want to start over.
Can you guys hear me all right now?
Yeah, we were just getting a lot of blowback from your speakers.
All right. Yeah, I turned off the phone and I Skyped it in. This will be better.
That's probably better, yeah.
Yeah, the Nobel all those prizes are sham organizations set up by the same cabal, giving each other awards to give each other credibility. The same thing happens with the Oscars, and there's a lot more of that going on than you'd think. But how can a warmonger win a Nobel Peace Prize at the end of the day?
Yeah, I mean, they gave him one. So it's interesting. So there's a lot going on, and we kind of had this idea for this show. And I'm looking through that's like I was telling you earlier, my notes are like my brain. They're just like, it's all over the place. But,
well, I've been hearing a lot of talk from you guys, and you guys did more research on this than I did, because I've been essentially in seclusion like Julian Assange over here, working on that book. But I have come across the topic we're going to talk about tonight a few times, the relationship between Trump being the 45th president, and apparently there's a prophecy you're going to talk to us about that is related to the prophecy of King Cyrus that is very linked up to today.
Yeah, I mean, we can kind of set it up. Everyone, the election was recent history, right? We all can kind of remember, and in my opinion, propaganda at this point is completely off the charts. Even I would argue even worse than it was during the election. The amount of attacks and I'm not. It's just a little disclaimer here. I'm not a Trump cheerleader by any means. I just found this compelling and interesting and worthwhile to maybe kind of lay out, because there may be something to it. You just look at you start back, you look at the contrasting differences between what we had during the election, right? I mean, they were so completely opposite. And let's be honest, right? Democrat, Republican, those classifications.
They are wings on the same bird.
Yeah, those classifications have been out the window a long time, and I have a feeling that everybody knows that. It just doesn't matter. So you just look at it, and of course, we try to tie everything back into biblical context, and it was clear there was two very different paths that the country could go down. And what are you doing at your house right now, Hooper? Are you building something?
Why?
Because it's like way loud.
I don't think it's on my end.
Okay, it's not here.
It could be our buddies at Langley, Virginia, listening.
Are you building a bomb over there?
It's not like you're framing a house.
I'm actually, guys, I'm building a bomb shelter. I didn't want to have to tell you.
Yeah. So there's clearly two paths, and we talked a little bit before about prophecies that come out, modern day, quote-unquote prophecies, which obviously some of them, I believe now, are fully credible because they manifested. I think the one that stands out the most is the Mark Taylor prophecy from 2011, right?
How much do you guys trust these prophecies?
Well,
on a scale of 1 to 100.
Here's the deal. I mean, in 2011, there was, well, to be fair, the idea and the question to Trump directly, actually, whether you would run for president or not, has kind of been out there for quite some time.
Yeah, it was the early 2000s.
Back in the
90s.
even 90s, yeah.
Okay.
People were asking him if he was going to run for president, and
I just saw a show about, it was a recap of the 80s. It was a 8-part series done by, I want to say, Fox or CNN. It's on Netflix. It's excellent, but it's ironic because this was a recap of the 1980s, and Donald Trump was in there, a young Donald Trump, same hairdo, and they asked him about his political aspirations back then, and that somehow made the cut of this program, which was produced over a year plus ago at least.
Yeah, it wasn't, I guess, so to be fair, it's not a new concept, but he certainly didn't announce it in 2011. So if someone comes out and claims that they have a prophecy that Donald Trump is going to be president in 2016, 5 years before it happens, and it actually has some details in that that kind of, I mean, they jive. So when they come true, you know, there's so many of them out there, but I do think that some of these are real. I mean, if you look at, and like the I don't know what you call it, but the plug that we put out for the show today is if prophecy is pattern, which it clearly is. But I posed it as a question, so it wasn't so, you know, so aggressive. But if there was prophets then, there'll be prophets now, and it's just a matter of whether we can listen to the ones that are accurate.
Yeah, look, there have been prophets all throughout history, and the warnings that or I should say the messages we received, the most recent being about 90 A.D., through the book of Revelation. That's when that was written by John the Revelator. It doesn't say that there will be no prophets. Don't listen to any of them. They're very careful to say, make sure you know you're listening to the right ones. Don't be deceived and don't be ignorant.
Right.
As if to imply they will still be here. And I'm after looking into this, I fully believe that there is some type of ongoing communication between the spirit world and our world, and it's been constant. It didn't just end when the Bible was written. It's continued on to this day.
Yeah, I mean, they're patterns. So, the way God did it back then is an indication, or it may not be a direct roadmap because things change over thousands of years, but it's a pretty good key of how he'll do something in the future. And if he uses prophets back then to communicate things with the masses, as it would be, why wouldn't he do it now? I wouldn't say there's never going to be prophets again. That was just it. Because some of these guys, I think, are the real deal. You got the Mark Taylor prophecy. Now, if I would have listened to that in 2011, I'd have been like, whatever, dude, whatever. But clearly, there was some truth to it because it actually happened. And a guy that I just came across by accident, a guy named Clement, he's a minister of some sorts, and has some prophecies that I kind of came across, and I believe he's credible. And for example, I mean, we know who Trey Smith is, and Trey Smith totally vouches for this guy. That says a lot to me. But you go through some of this Kim Clement's prophecies, and he has some very interesting ones that actually materialized and manifested as well. So, I'm looking at Kim Clement right now. I know who the guy is. I didn't know him by name. I've heard his stuff before, and I was astounded by his accuracy. So I'm now familiar with the Kim Clement we were talking about earlier. But, just an example to kind of throw the guy some credibility. I mean, in 2014, December, he had a prophecy about Saudi Arabia being caught in some fraud or something like this, and that God will raise up someone new to restore the U.S., that the U.S. isn't over, like what most people are thinking. That obviously came true. He didn't name anybody, but I don't think he really needed to at that point. But there's one interesting one in 2010 about France rising up against what he called the Beast of the East. And we all know who that or what that is. But I dug into that a little bit deeper because he mentioned something about the way France stopped at that time in the 7th century the jihadi armies from taking over in that time. Right. What was Paris?
Right.
And he was asked about it after he gave this. And I said, "Why did you say that about the 7th century?" And his response was, "I have no idea." Well, they actually looked into it, and historians they confirmed that in the 7th century, the French stopped jihadi forces from, at that time, the terrorists of that time, from taking over what is today Paris, and they all seem to be in agreement that if they would have failed at that, all of Europe would be Islamic.
Yeah, it was actually the French that repelled that. What you're talking about is as Islam grew and as Islam was doing its conquering, which I believe it was that corresponds with the Dark Ages, does it not?
Yeah.
Okay, so as Islam was doing its thing and trying to spread the way Christianity had spread prior to Islam, that was as far into Europe as they got. The French, was it the last time the French have won a war on their own? The French actually stopped it. Otherwise, if they would have got past France, who knows what would have happened?
Yeah,
because they made it. They made it through Rome.
Right.
They made it.
They
through,
did. And so I thought that was interesting. And these are people you guys can look them up. Again, we don't come as historians or we're just
throwing topics.
We're
out
finding
there
this stuff,
about,
and if once you start digging into it, it's really interesting. So we got Mark Taylor, we got Kim Clement, a guy that's totally worthwhile looking into, in my opinion.
I agree.
Now, have you seen the Indian guy? And I am going to butcher his name, and I am so sorry because I think this guy is the real deal. Sadhu Sundar Selvaraj.
I know exactly who you're talking about.
You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
This guy's awesome. He's
Isn't he out of the Philippines?
No, he's Indian. So he had gone to the Philippines to deliver a prophecy to them directly.
That's what it was. Yeah.
But he also in August of 2016 came out, and at that point, in August of 2016, now that was before the election, to where we weren't quite settled yet what was really going on.
Right.
He came out and called it and said Trump is going to be the next president. So
August, that was before the DNC, wasn't it?
It
was after the RNC.
It was in the summer.
After the RNC, but before the DNC.
And once you start kind of looking into, like, say, Trump prophecy, like searching this stuff, you come up with many, many, many more that are claiming that Trump is a modern-day Cyrus, and that caught my attention. And this, to me, is really, really interesting. And once I started looking into it, it's fascinating. I mean, there's parallels here that, and that's why I kind of started off with, the propaganda's off the charts, right? So all you're going to hear about is Trump said this, Trump did this, he's evil this, he's bad this.
Right.
And I'm seeing an awful lot of backlash judging his Christianity.
Right.
And of course this is on, social media, but just attack, brutal. I mean, where if that is being a Christian, I don't want to be one. He's been in church more since he ran for president than the 69 years, but blah, 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 which obviously anyone who is grounded in what the history of and the meaning of Christianity is knows that a lot of the people that God used to do his work used to be horrible human beings.
Yeah.
And something changed. Mm-hmm. Now, this very well may be the case this time around. I also find it interesting that, I also put on there that the United States is commonly called like a modern-day Babylon. And I agree with that analogy. But the further I dug into this, the more true that actually seems to be. Because really Israel was called Babylon almost more in the Bible than Babylon itself was called Babylon. In comparison, right?
Right.
So you got all this stuff. So what does it all mean? What are we getting at?
But there are two interesting sides to this, and I have a little theory about it. Kim Clement's earliest prophecy that I found about Trump was from 2007.
It's about him specifically?
Yes.
Okay, see, so, there's, I don't know, for me it holds water, man.
And
I can't dismiss it at this point anymore.
Juxtapose that with the predictive programming that's done on a lot of shows, like the images of Trump running for president on Family Guy, for instance. It almost wouldn't surprise me, because this week I also had read some reports that inside the Secret Service, it has been a known fact for 2 years now that Trump was going to be the next president. It's as if it had already been decided. And presidents are often determined a decade before they come up. That was the case with Bill Clinton when apparently there were reports about Bill Clinton being president when Reagan was in office. So it wouldn't surprise me if dark forces had intended Trump to be the coming president. Somewhere along the way, Trump gets, for lack of a better word, infected by the truth or God, or he, in a sense, literally flips sides. And as dark forces start to realize that this guy has flipped, he is converted to Christianity, he's building an all-Christian cabinet, then the real attack dogs start on Trump, trying to change that to get one of their own people in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that is an interesting dynamic, because if, and I tend to take it from the angle that if it is true that, and either way, right, we know this is true, but if it was a direct action by God to put Trump in that position, and he actually won, then it totally foils their dark plans, if that's the case, right?
Right.
So that explains the attacks. I mean, to the point where I actually, you kind of talk to a lot of people, and they say things like, I just can't stand the way he talks, I just can't stand the way he carries himself, he's so rude, this, so, and I haven't really, up until that point, spent a lot of time really listening to interviews. I kind of disconnected from media altogether because I just get annoyed. But if you actually listen to what the guy is saying during interviews, not the spun, edited version, but actual interviews,
right.
If you actually listen to what he's saying at his rallies, his message has really been spot on. And all this hate that people claim, okay, the guy said some dumb stuff, I don't know, but I'm not finding that as much as I'm finding him saying things like our security is at risk, our economy needs to be improved, the world has been ripping us off for decades. I mean, he was saying that back when the first Gulf War, when we went in to liberate Kuwait, he was complaining that the poorest people in Kuwait live like kings, and this is from Trump's own words. And we actually were the ones that provided that ability for them, and they're not even paying. And he's saying things like they should be paying us 25%. This is ridiculous. And he was saying this back then.
Yeah, it's not. It's not that the world is ripping us off. It's the powers behind central banks. It's the military-industrial complex, the cabal, Illuminati, what you want to call them. They have been shifting the wealth out of the United States. And this will be documented in the book that's coming out soon. Since about the early 70s, this really began with Nixon when he took us off the gold standard. I don't want to get too far off on that tangent. But this has been a 40-year plan of slowly removing wealth, our production ability right out of this country, made us a service-oriented economy. And we have literally racked up trillions in debt since Nixon in order to maintain the United States lifestyle, that's the house of cards that every economist is in fear of, because if it collapses, the whole world is in big trouble.
Yeah, and that's actually a direct description of one of the parallels of us in Babylon.
Well, one other thing I want to mention about these prophecies, because I've had a few friends, and let me know if you guys have ever run across this, but they'll say something along the lines of, "Oh, well, if you predict, if you look on the internet, you can find prophecies of anyone becoming president. They're going to throw every name out there, and yes, some of them are right. At the end of the day, one of them ends up being right." But I went, for instance, looking for prophecies saying Bill Gates would be president. Because 10 years ago, the odds of Bill Gates or Donald Trump becoming president...
Yeah, Bill Gates was probably the better choice.
Well, the odds would probably be the same, I would think.
But I can't find any Bill Gates prophecies.
I'm not.
Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah,
but I
do.
Find hundreds of Donald Trump prophecies going back almost a decade.
Well, and talking about prophecy, I can understand the cynical response because I often give the same response, right? But what we can't argue with is biblical prophecy that
right.
We already know, all right? There's no... It's mathematically so accurate that it's impossible. For example, we bring up the King Cyrus prophecy. This was written about 150 years before Daniel from the Bible, Daniel.
The book of.
As in the book of Daniel. 150 years, give or take, before Daniel or Cyrus were even born. The book of Isaiah was written, which provides us with the King Cyrus prophecy. I mean, the biblical prophecy goes. You can go on and on. I mean, the mathematical accuracy of it is something that can't be contested.
Right. If you understand statistics and probability, what's going on, and there are several. It's not that there's one prophetic book in the Bible, because everyone always assumes, Book of Revelation, that is the prophetic book. But you said it best, Dave, at the beginning. God doesn't just do anything once. He is a God of pattern. And that pattern goes back to literally the Garden of Eden.
Well, that I want to stay right there because you bring up the Garden of Eden, which is it just popped into my head because when we talk about a lot of times, refer to the United States as Babylon, a lot of people, and I've had this same sentiment myself, that, what makes us deserve to be restored? I mean, we almost, if you really look at the whole picture in a human mind, I've thought this myself, that we really do kind of deserve to be destroyed for a lot of reasons. But then you think about it, well, when you bring up the Garden of Eden, the question is, when have we ever deserved to be saved or restored, and that goes back to the garden,
right?
So, even God had sympathy for Babylon itself at times, and that brings up the King Cyrus. So we talk about biblical prophecy, we talk about the accuracy, the mathematical probability of impossibility that these things actually were written hundreds of years before they happened. They did happen. You could go through all the prophecies about Jesus Christ himself that were written hundreds of years before he even showed up. It's just in your face.
Well, there were actually 153 well-documented prophecies, and there are many that are up for a little bit of interpretation. But if you just look at the 153 that surround, and there's at least 153, there's probably many more that started 2,000 years before Jesus Christ, 1,500 years before Jesus Christ showed up, beginning to talk about the fact that there was going to be a man. He was going to be born in the town of Bethlehem in the state of Nazareth in the nation of Israel. He would have to escape the Egyptian king's mandate to kill all the children. All these things. He was going to be crucified. That was before crucifixion was even a form of punishment. And King Cyrus's prophecy, by the way, I think I wasn't sure what book you said, but that comes out of the book of Isaiah.
Well,
And it was written 150 years.
Right.
Written to the king.
And for anybody who,
in his name.
Right.
Anybody who
150
wants
years
to
written.
play along at home, we're talking about Isaiah chapter 45.
Well, I'm going to get to that because this is I'm actually going to read it because it's really important about with what we're talking about. And numbers play a part. Isaiah 45, it's interesting because it's the 45th president.
Right.
Transitioning from the 44th, and the Isaiah prophecy, King Cyrus prophecy in Isaiah, actually starts in 44 and then continues into 45, which is interesting to me. And I found some other information. So if you look at the Hebrew calendar, right, because numbers are huge in the Bible. We're coming into the year 5,777. 777.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows what 7 means.
Right.
3 of them, right, is... So anytime... A good example is... everyone is familiar if you've ever sat in church or catechism or whatever it is. Everyone's heard the phrase, woe to those who... When it's woe, it's really, really bad. When it's woe, it's like, if it's 3 woes, which I think happens in the book of Revelation, it is, people on fire. It's the word, it's hell came up to the earth, and that's it. So it actually, that year translates, the Hebrew year translates into the year of building and prosperity, not destruction and, chaos or any of this. So this is interesting. So we're going into the year, Hebrew year, 5777. The number 7, just to kind of define this, everyone that's familiar with it knows 7 is God's perfect number. It symbolizes something finished, completeness, right? Created the world in 7 days. In fact, the number 7 appears 735 times in the Bible, 54 times in the book of Revelation alone. It's a big-time number.
And it appears, and it's actually in the Bible much, much more than that. You're talking, I think, about the number of times where the actual number 7 is
That's
mentioned.
Right. Not multiples, that even takes it further.
But the convention of 7, it manifests all throughout the Bible. And the number of letters that were sent to the churches, the mathematics of 7, and that perfect formula is all over. That is,
it's all through it. So numbers are a big deal, right? And it creates patterns. It's how we determined you can determine the exact date Jesus would ride the donkey into the city, and on. These things can all be calculated, and a lot of it is multiples of 7.
in fact, that Jesus riding into Jerusalem on a donkey, and that prophecy often gets, people are like, well, anyone could, the Son of God's supposed to ride in on a donkey. Well, anyone can do that. That is true. Anyone can. But you have to understand, there wasn't internet. There wasn't even a duplicating copying machine back then. Yet somehow, before Jesus arrived there, the road into Jerusalem was filled with thousands upon thousands of people who had been interpreting the prophecies that had been handed down to them in the ancient books, which would later become our Bible. They knew he was going to be there on that day.
Right.
They were waiting for him already. It's not like they got an email from Jesus' headquarters saying, hey, we're coming in today. They were already there waiting for him.
Right. So, excuse me. So, to really kind of, put this all together with what I found, we kind of have to go back to Nebuchadnezzar. Everyone's heard this name, right? It was the name of the... Assume
that we don't know.
Well, that's what I'm going to do. But I'm sure everyone's heard the name because it was the name of the ship in the Matrix.
That's right. But you're right.
But let's to kind of get into it. So you got Nebuchadnezzar, right? He was Babylonian king from 600 something BC, died in 561 BC, something like this. He wasn't just any king of Babylon, though. He was actually the most powerful Babylonian king that ever lived. He was a really big deal.
He was actually the most powerful man probably on the planet at that time. He was the head of the dominant society, the ruling kingdom of Earth.
Well, he literally was king of the entire Earth. So, arguably the most powerful human being that ever lived, as far as kings, leaders, rulers. He brought Babylon to its largest and most powerful level ever.
He started off, a lot of people would say that, well, he was at the beginning a pagan worshiper. He was a king of multiple gods,
That's
which
right.
we today would know as demons. He had a lot of incredible things happen to him. The first dispersion of the Jews was through Nebuchadnezzar's invasion of Israel. Something happened with him.
Well, something did happen, and it's in the book of Daniel, because actually we need to state that Daniel chapter 4 is written entirely by Nebuchadnezzar. A pagan king, by the way, wrote an entire chapter in our Bible.
But I wouldn't be surprised if we find Nebuchadnezzar at the end of the day in heaven. I think something happened to him, which is possibly happening to Trump, where he came to realize the truth once he was already in power. Well, and there was a punishment for Nebuchadnezzar, if you remember.
Well,
and it was, again, 7 years that he was turned into a babbling idiot for 7 years, and then given his kingdom back afterward. He was
literally turned into an animal. In fact, talking about numbers, because he got so full of himself, Nebuchadnezzar used Daniel as an interpreter for his dreams. He was actually the head astrologist, magician type guy, was Daniel. He actually gave Daniel a different name, Belteshazzar, but it's Daniel. So God punished Nebuchadnezzar for his pride, basically, and turned him into an animal. And here's where it gets really strange. So Daniel prayed for Nebuchadnezzar, because he was just like an animal. I mean, physically, mentally, everything.
Wait, was he literally turned into an animal?
Well, if you go to
life became like animal
in the Bible,
primordial like.
In the Bible, he was animal like, but if you go to Jewish texts, there's accounts that he actually physically, parts of him was changed into literally animal like. I don't know, but he certainly was caused to go insane in some way, like an animal, is how the Bible puts it. But what's interesting about it, with the numbers thing, is that, as a result of Daniel's prayers for Nebuchadnezzar, his 7 years of punishment was turned into 7 months. And then the king, Nebuchadnezzar, lamented his sins for 40 days. He lived in caves for another 40 days. He herded with the beasts of the forest for another 40 days. And then God restored his throne. And then the king did penance for 7 years. So here's 7, 40. You see, these numbers are very important. And they come in patterns. It's all over the place. But what ended up happening with Nebuchadnezzar, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, but he had Daniel interpret this dream for him, and it turned out that the dream was about Nebuchadnezzar himself, not his enemies, and he was basically going to be destroyed. So
Is this the writing on the wall prophecy?
The writing on the wall is Daniel 5, and that is about Belshazzar. We're going to get to that. That's going ahead a little bit. And Nebuchadnezzar is Belshazzar's father, just so we're clear. What ended up happening with Nebuchadnezzar, because of this experience, and also, if we're not familiar with the story of how, because he was a nasty dude, man. Like, he tried to force all of them to bow down to his idol that he built, right? And the Hebrews, the Jews, refused. And that's when he threw Daniel and the other guys into the furnace, and that's when it's a reference to literally Jesus showing up in there and saving them from burning to death, right?
Well, that was the first. I think this is what really put Daniel on the map with Nebuchadnezzar, because Daniel, he grew up, he was born in Israel, and he was just a teenager when the Babylonians came in, invaded, took over Israel, and they essentially made slaves out of the Israel people. Just about all of them were taken to Babylon.
Right.
And Daniel was actually brought into the royal court.
Yeah, he was like third in command.
Well, Nebuchadnezzar I think they ended up becoming friends. I mean, there was a lot of warmth there.
Well, and keep in mind, when that happened and they refused to bow down to his idol, those guys, Daniel and the other guys, I can't remember their names, but
Shadrach,
I'll get you their
Meshach,
names in a second.
Okay. He's still, according to at least Hebrew texts, he still slaughtered 600,000 Jews for not kneeling down and you know what I mean? So he was a nasty guy, but through these experiences he had, and he ended up acknowledging the God of Israel to the point where he had all of the artifacts from Israel essentially in a museum, protected, right? I mean, he kept these things. He had reverence for it. These
are all the religious, all of the
stuff
cups
in the temple,
all the
from the holiest of holies,
the goblets, the dishes, the silver, glasses, these things, treasure.
Kept in a Babylonian museum.
Yeah, protected. And he respected it. In fact,
his son didn't respect it too much. That didn't work out so well.
Well, we're getting to that because that's what leads into this. So for Nebuchadnezzar, here you have the most powerful king ever, literally king of the whole earth at that point. He's got Daniel. He literally gets to a point where he recognizes the God of Israel. In fact, there's artifacts from Babylon. There's the Nebuchadnezzar cylinder. There's the Cyrus cylinder. These are stone cuneiform cylinders that are authored by those guys that I just mentioned. So the Nebuchadnezzar cylinder, there's an interesting passage on it written by Nebuchadnezzar just to give you an idea where he ended up. And this is his words, what he wrote. So he says, "As for me, the king of Babylon, save me from sinning against your great Godhead. As for Belshazzar, the eldest son offspring, may he have reverence for the great Godhead in his heart. May he not commit any cultic mistake. May he have a life of plenitude." Now, this is on a pagan artifact from Babylon. The Babylonian king is writing literally about the God of the creator God, and hoping that his son also finds the same reverence that he did. So I found that pretty interesting.
It's a verification of the exact story in Daniel from a completely different source, a different language, documented. We know, and for anyone interested, look up those cylindrical cuneiform tablets, whatever you want to call them, because the story is actually written there, the exact one that was also written in Aramaic that the Jews had.
Well, what's interesting is that cylinder was actually bought in an auction for over $600,000 and now is in a private collection and makes it very hard to further study, doesn't it?
Yeah, I wonder whose private collection that's in.
It is anonymous. They don't know. So it's gone from public study.
For a mere $600,000.
$605,000, I think, was the exact price I found. But anyway, so you can see where this king ended up because of Daniel. So that leads us into, you mentioned Belshazzar, who was kind of an idiot, right? I mean, well, we all have, there's two choices, right? This is clear. We had two choices in the election. We have two choices in our life. We have two choices. There's one path or the other. And Belshazzar himself had two choices, but he chose not to respect God, not to, he chose the other way and became this kind of idiot playboy kind of party animal guy. And that's where you get to the story of the fall of Babylon to King Cyrus, which was completely non-violent.
Now, what was the relationship of Belshazzar to Daniel? Did you say that they're one and the same?
No. Daniel's name, King Nebuchadnezzar changed Daniel's name to Belteshazzar, not Belshazzar. So the two different guys. So Daniel just had a different name to the king, which was Nebuchadnezzar. He changed his name because Daniel isn't Babylonian enough, I guess. I don't know. I'm not expert enough to answer that.
Probably hard to pronounce.
Daniel? Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, if your name's Nebuchadnezzar, I think Daniel would be difficult.
But Nebuchadnezzar's oldest son, Belshazzar, is going to throw this huge party.
Right.
And 1,000 of his pagan princes all gathered in one place to have this huge party, right? And what goes on next is what gets really, really interesting, because that, for one, is a totally foolish thing to do. You don't bring all of your guys in power, known to everyone, we're having this party, we're going to be here, all of us are going to be here, and they're just getting drunk, having a good old time. Well, in his, drunken party state, he decided it'd be a really good idea to go ahead and get all of the treasures from the Jewish temple
and party with them.
And party with God's stuff.
Yeah.
So they're going to get drunk with God's stuff.
And what's funny is in the Bible, we read these stories and we're looking back on history, and some of these stories take hundreds of years to unfold. The story you're discussing has several events going on literally in the minutes within, because you're right, they're at a party and Nebuchadnezzar basically says, hey, screw it, let's go get all the Jewish, let's get their stuff and we're going to drink out of that.
Yeah, so not only is it the pagan princes and Belshazzar himself, but it's also all their prostitutes, concubines, it's just it's not a good scene, and obviously this doesn't make God very happy. So while they're partying all in this one spot, Babylon, to kind of describe the geographical layout, was surrounded by
moats, right?
Well, they were rivers, actually.
Okay.
So it's moving water, right? And that's what literally created their security around Babylon, was these rivers. You couldn't cross them, and if you did, then they would see you. You'd need boats. It was just no way, right? So,
and it wasn't just water; it was also there were walls behind it. But I think you're getting at the fact that while this party was going on, if I'm not mistaken,
while it was going on, the rivers surrounding Babylon had been diverted. So that throughout the night as they're partying, these rivers slowly, the water level slowly drops until they completely run dry. And that allows the surrounding Persian army to enter without any issue and go to the heart of Babylon, where all these people are. That's where they're headed. Now, at the time, the Persian army is led by the great King Cyrus. So this all goes on, and this leads us to Isaiah 44 and 45. And again, this was written about 150 years before Daniel or Cyrus were even born. So it starts in Isaiah 44 and then goes into Isaiah 45. Now, Trey Smith put this the best. He said, no pagan book can do this. And I love that statement because there's no way. So I'll start at Isaiah 44:26, which is right at the end of 44.
And while you get queued up with that,
I got
that
it right in front of me.
ties to modern day theories of how the United States is the Babylon discussed in the final days, because it was very clear that Babylon was in the prophecy at some point, and there is historical debate about this, was Babylon destroyed. Now, a lot of people believe that when Cyrus came in, that's what was meant by the destruction of Babylon. But when Cyrus came in, like you said, it was almost like a special ops covert mission.
It's very
These guys snuck into the city. Nothing was destroyed.
Well,
they simply, their armies just filtered in.
Here, this is important to point out, because the crux of what you're describing is that it wasn't the people of Babylon that were being judged this time. It was literally the systems of Babylon that were being judged, because not a sword was swung, not a spear was thrown, not an arrow was. So in Isaiah 44, it says, "Who says of Jerusalem, it shall be inhabited, of the towns of Judah they shall be rebuilt, and of their ruins I will restore them? Who says to the watery deep, be dry, and I will dry up your streams? Who says of Cyrus," this is when Cyrus first comes up, first time his name is mentioned, "He is my shepherd and will accomplish all that I please. He will say of Jerusalem, let it be rebuilt, and of the temple, let its foundations be laid." Now, that jump ahead a little bit, King Cyrus was the one that allowed the Second Temple to be built.
Right.
Not just allowed it, he helped.
He
diverted a lot of resources so that Israel could rebuild.
Well, it is kind of funny because he actually, not only did he demand and put it in writing that the walls would be built, he actually mandated that someone else will pay for it, which I find very interesting. And that's in the book of Ezra. We'll get to that. So Isaiah 45. So this is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of, to subdue nations before him, and to strip kings of their armor, to open doors before him, so that gates will not be shut. I will go before you, and will level the mountains. I will break down gates of bronze, and cut through bars of iron. He literally paved the way for Cyrus to enter Babylon, to have this. So what ends up happening is Daniel himself walks down the stairs from the main gates in Babylon and puts the Isaiah scroll in Cyrus's hand. Daniel hands this to Cyrus because he knows who Cyrus is, because he knows God's word. Now, mind you, that was written 150 years before these guys were born. So King Cyrus reads this and realizes what is going on, and literally comes to know God by being a good leader of Babylon. Very interesting. So even the way he entered was prophecy.
Yeah, the whole 9 yards.
But you brought up the writing on the wall, and that's something you hear a lot, right?
Right.
The writing on the wall
from this story.
That is Daniel chapter 5, I believe.
Yeah, when we hear that today, it's sort of like a little, a little metaphor, a saying, the writing's on the wall, guys. And that is supposed to stand for the fact that we know it's coming, the writing is on the wall. We repeat that not knowing the origin of it, but it comes from this very party that you're talking about. So the party, just to reframe it, the party's going on. It's being run by the son of the first Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel had actually he hadn't really been around the royal court for some time. And all of a sudden, everyone at this party sees just a hand writing a message on a wall. None of Nebuchadnezzar number 2's guys know how to interpret this. Nebuchadnezzar's own mother said, hey, there used to be this guy Daniel that your father talked to that he could interpret anything. Go get him. So now Daniel at this point is now an old man. He's not the teenager he was when he started with Nebuchadnezzar 1, Nebuchadnezzar 1's father. That's who put him in that fiery furnace where they survived.
Yeah. This is
survived that
yeah.
fire.
This is Belshazzar that sees the hand and literally craps his pants. It's described in that way, actually. I believe it says his loins are loosened or something like this. So and that actually is a fulfillment of prophecy, actually, which is kind of funny. But
did that really? So he did really lose control of his bowels.
Yeah, and I believe, I don't remember what book it's from, but God says, "I will loosen the loins of kings" or something like this. So it can be interpreted that him having diarrhea from fear was actually a fulfillment of prophecy, which I find kind of awesome. But anyway,
but the fear wasn't just in seeing the hand being written. It's when they finally bring Daniel to this party, and Daniel just bluntly says, I think you're going to repeat it. I don't have
Well,
it.
yeah, because, he promises him, he says, if you can, because they bring in everybody, dude. No one can interpret this writing. No one knows what it means, have no idea. So, yeah, the queen brings up the fact that Daniel is the guy, right? So they bring him in. Belshazzar promises him half his kingdom. Basically, if he can, he'll put him third in command. If he can, if he can interpret this. And the paraphrased kind of the flavor of what was said was pretty much, look, your father, he was a real king. You, not so much. I mean, you can't give away. Keep your stuff, basically. I'll interpret it for you, but you keep your stuff because your dad built this, not you, right? It's kind of like that. And the words, the way he interpreted it, he said, here's what the words mean. God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. And that actually is what ended up happening.
Yeah.
He was warned. So it's it's interesting. This is all historical, documented also in pagan artifacts as well.
Yeah. This is not just out of the Bible.
And we'll get in after the break and deeper into King Cyrus. But what's interesting about King Cyrus, we'll just kind of, because we're going to go to break soon, right?
Yeah, we need to go.
We'll just kind of end it with this. King Cyrus boasted about the kingdoms that he conquered without a fight.
Yeah, and many, many kingdoms laid down without bothering to fight because of who he was.
It was like a merger and acquisition process.
Yeah, kind of.
It's how he treated it.
Ooh, good analogy.
It's very, very interesting.
I like
so we'll get into that.
Did he write any books that you know of?
He wrote on stone cylinders, so I guess it's a book, kind of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, hey, we're going to take a quick break here. Let Kenny pay a couple bills, and we will be right back. Welcome back to Down the Rabbit Hole. We're talking about the 45th president and the what it's being called the Isaiah 45 prophecy, which we are expanding a little bit. into the 44th book, just prior. And we want to go over a few things about it, and we'll get David to call back in because he was echoing again.
Yeah, that's goofy.
Yeah, Skype. It's fun, isn't it? But I wanted to expand on something you were saying earlier. You got up a lot of steam, and you were making good points, so I didn't want to interrupt. But you were talking about modern-day prophets. And what I kind of wanted to say about that is it's, for me, it's really hard to look at someone who is prophesizing and, talking about the future and saying this is going to happen. And we've had so many false prophets over the years. I mean, we all know about Nostradamus. I mean, my God.
Well, there's more of those than...
Yeah, the stretches that people are making to apply Nostradamus's prophecies to things that are going on. It's just unbelievable. But what I wanted to say about prophecy, for me, it's kind of hard to identify. I'm thinking we're seeing some modern day prophets with the stuff we're uncovering in this topic, and the things that we uncovered prior to the election that kind of led us to do what we did, which happened in mass, and I believe led Donald Trump to be president. On behalf of. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people out there like us, I think, who came to the same conclusions. But with prophecy, it's hard for me. Okay, one thing I've learned is that nothing shocks me anymore. Okay, the second you find out that the Bible is accurate and true and not a fairy tale, it kind of, takes... There's really nothing left to be surprised about at that point.
Yeah, and surprise and fear, because fear is a big thing, and just keep in mind that fear is the exact opposite of faith.
Yes, exactly. It's the lack of faith.
So it's really easy to just be scared and think, "Oh, we're gonna burn. It's terrible." It's terrible.
It's the number one tool of the devil.
Obviously,
yeah. So, just to wrap up the whole modern day prophet, do we have modern day prophets? How could we know? Because the only way that the Bible becomes authenticated is over hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years, and you look back on it and go, holy smokes, this is exactly what they said was going to happen.
Right.
So we're not going to really know, in my opinion, if we have modern-day prophets for at least another 50 years.
Yeah, unless, of course, I do believe that
I mean, we can watch some of these things unfold over the next 4 to 8 years, and if they happen, like Mark Taylor and Kim Clement and a lot of these people are saying, then obviously they're modern-day prophets.
Proven to be true.
Right.
And the litmus test, and this is written in several places, is God's prophets. There have always been false prophets. God's prophets will make zero mistakes.
Right.
There will not be a single error. I mean, they could get everything right about Donald Trump, but if they say that, and he's going to get divorced in some sex scandal and that does not happen, he was not a real prophet. Right. And some of these guys, I don't know if you need to wait, certainly in some cases you do need to wait 30, 40, 50 years to know if what this prophet was talking about was true. But there's something is going on because the spiritual forces, both light and dark, seem to have coalesced around Donald Trump. And certainly there are going to be a lot of false prophets putting out BS stories. So just because some guy says, Donald Trump's going to be president, that does not mean that he is a legitimate prophet. You got to go much deeper than that. God will provide authenticating details.
Right.
Those details that no one but God could have known. And those we will see unfold over time, like you said, Howard.
Yeah, one prophecy alone does not a prophet make.
Yeah, I mean, even Nostradamus hit on 80% of his prophecies.
Yeah, I still think they were
and you can
always,
and I'm not saying that, I just these and it could just be that, you get a feeling like, hey man, this guy's probably the real deal. Because there's been others that I'm like, whatever, I don't even finish listening to what they're saying because it's just nonsense.
Yeah.
But something caught me about this, like this Kim Clement guy.
Yeah.
it just, something struck me about this guy. And at first, and he's like shouting in the microphone and getting really emotional about whatever. At first you're like, what is this guy even talking? But then you listen to what he's saying, and then you go look into it, find out that he said that in 2010, and then some years later, and he was actually right when, and I don't believe that he's lying when he said he didn't know why he mentioned the 7th century. It just came out of his mouth.
Right.
I just believe him. That maybe, you just have a feeling that you should probably tune into what this guy's saying.
Is this the prophecy you're referring to, or the Kim Clement? Is he on stage in front of some people and he's got like a keyboard in the video?
Usually a piano.
Okay.
Yeah, usually sitting behind a piano from what the ones I've seen. So again, like you said, modern day prophets. Yeah. God clearly states that in approaching the end days, that many, many, many people will prophesy.
Yes.
So I take him at his word.
He's been right on everything else.
I'm not about to call him a liar. So I assume we're going to see more of this.
He says also in the last days, he says your men will dream dreams,
exactly.
Children will have visions. And if you're someone listening, you're getting this weird feeling or these messages, you were probably in that group that was written about 2,000 years ago, because it was predicted that this would proliferate in the last days.
Yes.
Yeah, and there was one other quick point I wanted to touch on as far as, and you segued into it well with Kim Clement, and talking about not being so caught up in the way he is saying things and listening to what he says. I think that many of the people who are hanging on to this, I just don't like him. He's so braggadocious, and that's the thing. Is it's like, step back. Yeah, you have to be able to step back and remove emotion from the equation. Listen to what Trump is saying. Don't focus on the one or two sentences where he says something where the guy speaks from his heart, and he wears his heart on his sleeve. And what happens when that happens, when you have passion, every now and then when you speak from passion, every now and then you're going to make a mistake.
Yeah, and you're going to get angry.
You're going to say something wrong. Anger is going to cloud your judgment. But when you listen to the entirety of what this guy is talking about, how can you hear that and not think that he has good intentions in his heart? I don't understand.
Yeah, and that's really leads us in the interesting parallels to me between modern day U.S., where we are now, and Babylon at the time, and Cyrus literally walked in. The Belshazzar had this kingdom. He's literally just squandering what his father and ancestors had built before him. That's funny because it's kind of a lot like what is going on here.
Yeah.
Where you have all these people literally squandering what people before them had built, with no reverence or respect to it whatsoever. And
that's a great analogy.
Well, and not even recognizing the fact, giving credit where credit's due. And this was also that was the stage of Babylon at the time. I mean, the people there were being squeezed, taxed to death. It's very, very similar, and it's the systems. If you listen to what Donald Trump is talking about, now I don't defend or condone. I have never actually heard him say anything racist, but if I ever do, I don't condone that. I don't condone hate or anger or any of this, but
right.
Or necessarily agree with everything the guy says. But if you really listen to the substance, he's attacking the systems.
Right.
He's attacking the very things that are enslaving us, literally, through regulation, heavy taxation, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when, it obviously this was already pre-planned, because here comes King Cyrus. And you can interpret this the way you want, but I find it, like we mentioned this before, that not only is he mentioning building walls, but he's mentioning someone else paying for it. This is describing in the first year that Cyrus, king of Persia, in the book of Ezra, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm and also to put it in writing. This is what King Cyrus of Persia says. The Lord, the God of heaven. Now, King Cyrus is a pagan king, by the way. The Lord,
at this time.
Well, but this
at the time of the invasion of Babylon.
Exactly. But this changed, right? The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people among you may go up to Jerusalem in Judah and build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem, and may their God be with them. And in any locality where survivors may now be living, the people are to provide them with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, and with free will offerings for the temple of God in Jerusalem.
Meaning that
someone else is paying for it.
Using the resources of Babel.
I just find that a very strange parallel. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think Trump knows he's fulfilling prophecy. He might know by now, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's not even aware of this. Do you guys think he's aware of it?
I think people have probably...
I think they've made him aware of it.
I think maybe there's a reason he is where he's at right now, and if you look who he's surrounding himself with, and the fact that people are brutally attacking his Christianity tells me that, all right, something changed in this guy, just like what happened with King Cyrus. I don't know this.
Reports on our own show that he literally converted and got quote unquote saved in the months leading up to the election. So he may have been going in. I would not be surprised if Donald Trump's heart has changed in some way since he announced.
I think it has.
From all of this, I tend to believe that this is a repeating pattern, and that actually is a fact. I at this point convinced that that he's converted if he wasn't already going.
Yeah, I think it started out, and I think he started out with just kind of a what the heck, let's just upset the apple cart, and then as things transpired and everything started to fall into place, where he had a legitimate shot at a successful presidential run. I think it started to become clear to him, and I think that's when he was befriended by Ben Carson and so many of the people that now surround him. I refuse to believe a man like Ben Carson would be involved with Trump if he had not had a change of heart.
Well, I have a feeling Ben Carson's in tune with this as well, with what we're talking about.
Absolutely in tune
I'm
with
pretty
it.
sure he is. In fact,
Ben Carson says as much as you can say without looking wacky in our current world. He goes right up to the line. He's the one that had even associated Hillary Clinton with the powers of Lucifer in Saul Alinsky. She is a pupil of Saul Alinsky, who was a flat-out Luciferian Satanist.
Yeah.
She talked on stage at the Republican National Convention.
It's my opinion, but I think if you look through enough video footage, I'm convinced that she's completely demonized Hillary Clinton. She's absolutely playing for the dark side, no question. If you look at the contrast, too, think about it. She's talking about raising taxes, expanding government, all these things. He's so very much opposite of that. Look at what he's talking about. He's talking about lowering taxes, reducing regulation, securing our borders, where they're looking to just blow the borders wide open and forget about it and just let this place burn, because that's what will happen economically, socially, etc. We can do a whole show on why that's a fact.
Well, yeah, Satan's plan is to unite the world in a one world government, which means the erosion of borders. It means global trade. It means NAFTA. And that is what Hillary Clinton would have brought. God is very clear. Like he sets the borders of nations, and he wants those borders there for a reason. He does not.
Right.
It's not his plan to have a one world government. I
was listening to a Mark Taylor interview, and he discusses that very topic, that he and the preachers and the pastors he was talking to on the show, they had a really interesting discussion that, God is the one who defines the borders. And the reason why there are borders, i.e. walls, is to keep out evil.
Yeah. And it's absolutely true. I mean, you can't have a nation without a border. I mean, do we even have to?
You can't.
Come on. All right. So this is simple, to me, 101 stuff. But there's another interesting parallel on the same angle. So he's talking about reducing taxes. He's talking about improving the economy, which will improve blight. It will do away with it. It will do away with poverty. Allow companies to operate without this chokehold on them, so they can hire more people, and things will improve. What's interesting, there's another parallel here that I can't ignore. So there's these cylinders, right? They're pagan artifacts. There's a Nebuchadnezzar cylinder. There's also a Cyrus cylinder that he authored. And there's a section of that I thought was really cool, that Cyrus wrote. He says, "The citizens of Babylon, I lifted their unbecoming yokes, their dilapidated dwellings I restored. I put an end to their misfortunes." This King Cyrus wrote this. So that's very interesting, because Donald Trump, think what you want about him, but what's he known for doing? How did he become successful? By taking dilapidated buildings and properties, restoring them, turning them into nice places, apartment buildings, etc., and really creating jobs and improving the whole area around it, for that matter. This is also interesting to me. And really, talking of, King Cyrus, before, we all know kind of like the historical way that kings would conquer lands, right? They go in, this big battle, and whoever's left standing, whoever's left standing wins. But King Cyrus didn't operate this way. He really looked at it, like I said before, more like mergers and acquisitions, more of a corporate mentality, where he boasted more about the conquests he made with no fight.
Right.
It was more of a business arrangement for him.
Right. Those were his great source of pride. Not the times that they had to.
Not how many exactly. So there's a very interesting parallel here that is too much to ignore, in my opinion.
Are you, Dave? Are you going to be addressing Daniel's 70-week prophecy in this at all?
No, but you can touch on that, because that's another mathematical big deal.
So one of the biggest, there are four major prophets. Daniel and Isaiah are two of the major prophetic books. Now, prophecy you can find in just about every single one of the 66 books in that make up the Bible. What's interesting, there's a prophecy for anyone listening that wants to look it up. Just do a Google search on Daniel's 70 weeks.
Which is a multiple of 7, by the way.
Exactly. And this is 7, and it's actually 70 weeks of years. And the only question mark that's in there is that there's, basically all the future history of the world is laid out in this prophecy. We know that when it's written, Babylon is the first demonic kingdom. It's going to be followed by the Greeks, led by Alexander, which will then be conquered by the Romans, another demonic kingdom. And the fourth and final demonic kingdom is what some call the hidden Rome, which scholars have linked to the modern day Babylonian system, which came to be when Rome was never conquered. It just morphed into the Vatican and the former Caesars of Rome became the popes and the kings and queens and dukes and duchesses of most of Europe, still all related by blood to these Roman Caesars who also controlled currency. And you can actually, you don't need to go through the Bible. You can link that back up many different ways because history starts to be recorded much more thoroughly as Rome is starting to, wither away into quote unquote nothing. But they were never conquered, and they didn't just go away into thin air. They simply changed the label under which they were doing business. And in the time since then, they've operated under so many different labels that it's hard for people to track them throughout history. It's part of the way that they've hidden themselves in plain sight. What's interesting is Daniel makes this prediction about what's going to happen, from now till the end of time. And he says during that fourth, the hidden Roman kingdom, which will be essentially, it will go public in the days after the resurrection and reestablishment of the state of Israel. And that 70-week prophecy, it began with King Cyrus. And King Cyrus was also king when the Babylonian Empire went kaput. Almost, Cyrus almost brought it down on purpose. And I don't know enough about that to say whether it was purposeful or accidental. But he did oversee the end of Babylon. Cyrus did. And that is when Daniel's 70-week prophecy began, which is supposed to end within a generation or so of the reestablishment of Israel. And here we come, again, God is a God of pattern and formula. Here we have a guy, like you pointed out, Dave, that is doing and saying, he's got the same ideology and almost, it seems, the same history that Cyrus did, Donald Trump has. And it would tie up that 70 weeks beautifully. Because God leaves no details, there's no wires that are left unconnected. Everything connects together. But go ahead.
Well, yeah, and that's it's important to point out too that, if we think that, we can't say go a little bit sideways and at the same time God's prophecies still get fulfilled, I think you can find some evidence for that in the book of Jonah, where he didn't follow, but it still happened anyway.
Right.
And the events that took place, that's the fish guy.
So what was the prophecy with Jonah?
He was sent to Nineveh commanded to go to Nineveh to warn them that they have 40 days to get their act together, right? And I'm gonna probably destroy this, but it's just from memory. And he didn't want to, so he tried to run away from God. He didn't want to do that, and got on a boat instead. And then, God said, okay, fine, you don't want to do it that way, do it my way. And he caused a really big storm, and Jonah knew it was his fault. So they all knew that he was Hebrew, so they were kind of on him about it, like, what's going on? Why is your God doing this? He's like, it's my fault. Just throw me overboard. If you throw me overboard because it's my fault, the storm will calm and you guys won't all perish too. So they end up throwing him overboard, and then the seas calm, and that's when the giant fish, which now we understand it as a whale, swallowed Jonah, and he had him in there for 3 days, which is interesting.
Right. It's the same 3 days that Jesus Christ was in the belly of...
So while he's in this fish, he repents, and God commands the fish to puke him out onto dry land, and he ends up going into Nineveh and warning everybody, and the rulers there had reverence for God and ordered immediately that everybody put on sackcloth, including the king. They all fast. Not even animals were allowed to eat. They just had to basically bow down to God and ask him for forgiveness so that he doesn't destroy their nation. And sure enough, God heard them, and his purpose was fulfilled, even if it wasn't the way it was originally supposed to happen. It still happened. So we can go sideways, us little people here. If he says it's going to be, it's going to be.
Yeah, it's going to happen.
One way or the other.
And personally, this story makes me very thankful that my repentance didn't involve me being puked out of a fish.
Yeah, I don't want to be inside a whale for 3 days, dude.
No.
So,
I had to go to Secretary of State once.
That's probably similar. And I don't know that it smells any better.
Do you know, when you guys hear that, do you, I'm just curious your take on it. Do you interpret that literally, that Daniel really was inside the belly of a whale? Because this is where a lot of people will sort of get, they'll roll their eyes and go, okay, come on, that's not possible.
We have the lovely Cat.
Cat's here.
Cat is
Hi,
dying
Hooper.
to chime in.
I just
Hi,
hear
Cat.
Hooper in a box. No, it's funny that you said that, because I just wanted to say one thing, and that is, for anyone listening that doesn't believe any of this stuff, the idea, right, of a guy being swallowed by a whale and then puked out, it sounds crazy, but I'm going to tell you what. If you determine that Jesus Christ was who he said he was, then that means you believe that he was nailed to a cross, buried for 3 days, rose from the dead, and ascended to heaven. So if you can believe that, I think you can believe the 3 day, because God is powerful. The inside of that whale could have looked like a 5-bedroom condo.
This
for all we know.
This has actually happened, where people have been ingested by a whale and lived to tell the story.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's totally insane. I mean, this has actually happened. So I absolutely take it literally. Absolutely. No question about it.
If the book says it's literal, it's literal.
That's one of those, it's hard to believe, but maybe that's where faith comes in, because I do believe.
Yeah, well, it's hard to believe Obama got a second term.
It's also hard to believe that Trump got elected. I mean, it is.
Hey, I that's why when I started kind of digging into this, it aroused so much interest in my heart that I'm like, we got to talk about this, because there's just too many parallels here
There are.
to ignore it. So the other part of it is his unwavering support for Israel. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that, we've been over this on this show before.
Right.
And
Are you talking about God's unwavering support?
no, I'm talking about Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
Okay.
He will not waver on this, and that, to me, is very interesting, because he's been asked this question more than once. And his answer before the question even exits the person's mouth is absolutely, I support Israel, no question about this. So this is interesting to me, because timelines, numbers, what needs to happen in Israel for prophecy to completely be fulfilled.
Year of building and
prosperity. The third temple needs to be constructed. Now,
right, here we are again. A temple needs to be constructed like it did under Cyrus.
It would kind of help if we had a president that supported Israel.
Trump would
you find it odd that a president who's the lamest duck you can be with 30 days to go is having his administration literally cut ties.
Yeah.
It's demonizing Israel.
It's a last-ditch effort.
Yep.
It's a last-ditch effort.
You guys, Donald Trump's a negotiator, and I could see him sitting down with the powers that be in the Middle East and trying to broker a deal. And that would thereby give Israel the chance to build that temple in peace, right? Because there's going to need to be peace in that region in order for the Jews to be able to rebuild. Right. So something has to happen before that, and maybe Donald Trump is the guy who will bridge that gap temporarily.
I at least would contend that it would help.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Being that, and really, in the face of, I can't think of, and now our country included, Israel doesn't have any support out there anymore.
No,
I mean, the UN has turned their backs on them.
They have Russia, but they're reestablishing ties with Russia.
I mean, and that may just be like, all right, we got to do something.
And the reason why I see hope in this and why I think it's possible is because a lot of the negotiations that I've seen recently to try to broker peace is always simply making the Arab countries give in, okay? It's always about what the Arab countries need to do to broker a peace deal with Israel. And to be honest, we've talked about some of these things on the show as well, the way they've extended borders and stuff like that beyond what was given to them, to what they feel is their property, but it wasn't actually given it to them, Gaza and some of the West Bank, and I believe Trump being a negotiator, he's going to sit down and go, look, Israel, you want peace, so you got to give a little too.
You know what, though?
I don't know.
I think, and Dennis Prager does an excellent job summing up the conflict in the Middle East in like 5 minutes. Because the bottom line is, if Israel laid down their weapons today, there would be peace, or they would be blown off the face of the earth.
Yeah,
they would
it'd be over.
Yeah.
But if the Palestinians laid down their arms, there would be peace in that region. I mean, they've already conceded the
It's
West
a valid
Bank
point.
and the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, it's a valid point.
They've already conceded that. And those guys don't even, they want it back, but they're willing, they want to be acknowledged as a Jewish state. That's what they want.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, they know what time it is. We know what time it is. And we're talking about, the pending doom here in the United States and the idea that it's the modern-day Babylon and we're suited for destruction. How many times have you heard this? But I think the formula for a nation to be accepted, forgiven, what word I'm kind of, to be saved by God, the formula is always the same. Mm-hmm. And talking about numbers, right? We're into the Hebrew year 5777, 777. So if you go to 2nd Chronicles 7:14, which is 3 sevens, right? If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. I do believe the formula has always been the same.
Yeah.
100%.
So then you can take that and say, okay, well, when has this been fulfilled? Interestingly enough, and I got to shout out, hat tip, whatever you want to call it, to Trey Smith. This guy is top dog hero in my book right now. 2nd Chronicles 14:7. Flip them. And here you have it. This is because Asa, king of Judah, did what was good and right in the eyes of the Lord. In 2nd Chronicles 14:7, let us build up these towns, he said to Judah, and put walls around them with towers, gates, and bars. The land is still ours because we have sought the Lord our God. We sought him, and he has given us rest on every side. So they built and prospered. Now, inauguration's coming up, right? What day? Because I am totally clueless.
January 20th.
January 20th. So after that day, if we get there and he is inaugurated in one piece and everything goes the way it's supposed to go and Michael Moore gets arrested, which I pray for. Sorry if that's
Why
a
do you
bad
say
thing.
that?
Because he's threatening to cause some protest junk at the inauguration. It's going to be really a mess. But if that goes well, so what I'm going to be looking for next is, number one, I really hope to see an open prayer to Jesus Christ at the inauguration.
You will. Franklin Graham has been invited to be
Okay,
there.
then
Awesome.
then
Yeah,
we are
that's
then
awesome.
then
Yeah.
we are, then the gears are meshing in my mind, and I am completely convicted at this point. If I see this happen, and it is a Christian inauguration, and I don't mean that to sound what's the buzzword these days? Not inclusive or whatever. And if Trump calls for humility and recognizes God openly as our president, which has been a very long time since something like this has happened, as he's president, then I think it's probably safe to say that these patterns, these prophecies, where we're headed is, at least for a time, is going to be good.
Catherine, would you explain to our listeners the significance of Franklin Graham?
Well, Franklin Graham is the son of Billy Graham, and during the campaign, the 2016 campaign, Franklin Graham was hosting prayer rallies all over the United States. He was literally campaigning for Trump, but through prayer. And there was tens of thousands of people who showed up and were really praying that Donald Trump would be elected. The article that I have right now that I'm looking at, it's from World News Politics, and the headline is Trump plans first Christian inauguration in history. And it says that there's going to be 6 religious figures, and among them, one of them is Franklin Graham. And so it really looks like it is going to be a Christian ceremony, and I think there's going to be a ton of protesters there.
Oh, it's going to be, yeah. And of course.
I pray he gets through.
I think he will, because I have a feeling there's only one reason he's there, obviously.
Right.
It wasn't allowed to be there. He was put there.
If it's God's decision, it does not matter if nukes are fired that day, if there's a revolution that day. If God wants Trump to be the president, it's going to happen.
Of course, yeah. And and we talk about his support of Israel and how King Cyrus supported Jerusalem, which is Israel. You can define Israel by borders, obviously. But I came across something interesting today because, Israel is a Jewish state. It is the land of the Jews given to them by God.
By God.
Now, it's also an ideology.
Well,
it's one of the confusing things in the book is you can read it. Yes, there are territorial borders of Israel, which was given to modern-day Israel in the Balfour Declaration, and then Israel went and took more land, which was the land that had originally been given to Abraham.
Well, interestingly enough, the United States, and depending on the source, it's very close. If you look at the world population of Jews, the number of Jews in Israel proper is almost exactly the same amount that are in the United States. So depending on the source,
it's 7 million in Israel, roughly 7 million, and if you guys know the numbers differently, correct me.
That's pretty darn close. So basically,
the vast majority of Jews on Earth today are on those two nations.
Exactly. So you have it. They're maybe tied, but if anything, Israel proper has the most population of Jews. Obviously, it's Israel. And
how did all those Jews get here?
Well, and then by coming in second place or tied, or depending on the source, it may even have jumped above the population of Israel. The amount of Jews in the United States is very, very close to the amount in Israel. And what I found also very interesting is that as of, I think it was either 2013 or 2015. You can look this up. I believe it's in the Jewish Encyclopedia, but that the world population of Jews has almost been fully restored to pre-World War II numbers. So all of these puzzle pieces are falling into place, and of course, you can deny it, you can say it's all nonsense, but there's just too many coincidences for me.
No, I mean, look,
there's too many coincidences for me.
God said he's going to use the moon and the sun as signs. He's going to use the stars as signs. There have been 4 blood moon tetrads in the last 550 years. We had one last year. And every time there's a blood moon tetrad, there has been, sometimes you didn't know it at the time. Sometimes it would take 100 years to realize, oh my gosh, that was a world pivoting event. So there was one last year. The one prior to that was in 1967, which was the year that, for the first time, a Jewish army reclaimed the city of Jerusalem. The time before that was 1948, the year that Israel became an official state. And the time before that was in 1492.
Oh, interesting.
And why is that interesting? It's not just because Columbus came to the United States or came to the New World as we know it. 1492 is when the Jews were kicked out of Spain.
Right.
And where did they ultimately that was a major body of the founders of the United States.
Well, it's actually theorized that Columbus's mission was actually to pursue the Jews that were coming here.
And
now that's conspiracy, but
I've heard that. I've heard that as well.
Yeah. What's that?
Wasn't Chris Columbus a Jew?
This I don't know.
I think he was.
He might have been, but I thought that part of his mission, why it was funded so much, was to chase them down.
Yeah, because every time he came up with the mission to the New World, he was rejected, and then the idea was proposed to him that he rephrased it to the King and Queen of Spain, that I could find the Jews while I'm there. And if you're going to find the Jews, then here's all the money you need.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
Ferdinand and Isabella ultimately financed his mission.
When no one else would.
Yeah, interesting.
But the path he opened up leads to the population of what the Americas. And it's interesting because really the only two nations that have ever been founded under, in a sense, a covenant with God is A, Israel, and B, the United States. And there's certainly, those nations have enjoyed a prosperity and a longevity that it's almost supernatural in the way that their histories have unfolded. And it's sort of interesting, but what began in a blood moon tetrad in 1492 leads to a Jewish population move to the Americas, and now we've got essentially a balance of Jews in the U.S. and in Israel, ties together the last four blood moon prophecies, and this would actually augment that. It's almost poetic, symphonic, the way that this is playing out.
Here's 3 sentences that talk about Columbus. It says, some scholars, after analyzing Columbus's will and other documents, have devised a new theory about the explorer. They believe he was a Marino, or a Jew who pretended to be a Catholic to avoid religious persecution. These historians also theorize that Columbus's main goal in life was to liberate Jerusalem from Muslim control, and that he decided to take his historic quest to North America in order to find a new homeland for the Jews who had been forced out of Spain.
Now that is compelling as all get out. Because
that's the HuffPost.
Well, that's interesting because even they sometimes truth gets through.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That is again, I mean,
and look, we're all taught to believe that Columbus, quote unquote, discovered the New World, but he didn't.
No, and that's.
I mean, you could certainly make an argument that America is named after America.
Yeah, there were people here.
Vespucci.
Yeah, there were people here, so he didn't really discover anything.
Yeah, he discovered the people.
Yeah, there were already people here. So.
But isn't it funny that it's Columbus's name that's associated with 1492 with this blood moon tetrad?
Yeah. Well, the Vikings were here. I mean,
that's a name we're very, very familiar with to this day.
Well, there's evidence of the Phoenicians being here for crying out loud.
They were pulling copper out of northern Michigan.
Of course,
thousands of years ago.
Some of my liberal friends, I've noticed now that this issue is happening with Israel. I mean, it's been going on forever, but the liberal line on this now seems to be, because I was talking to a friend of mine on Facebook, and my friend, all I said was, that land belonged to the Jews to begin with, and maybe we should, be supportive of them getting their land back. His response to me was, then you need to give this land back to the Native Americans. That is such apples to oranges.
Well,
it's ridiculous.
That is right out of Satan's playbook because it's being used. That same methodology is being used right now in high octane mode. Whether it's
called justification.
Look,
well, you hate it's all this tension now that's being mounted to turn everybody against each other.
Right.
Now so of course America sucks. We did this. So what are you gonna do about it?
Right. Well, I told him, look, we already paid reparations, number one. Number two, I don't see the Native Americans complaining right now. And number three, we're not trying to attack them. If all those 3 things were happening, then yes, we could compare that to.
Well, if you look at
if
you look at the history of it, the difference is that North America was settled. It wasn't conquered like other places were. It was settled. and conflicts. They try to condense hundreds of years of history into a couple events. Like the real, and it's hard to get into all this. We only got a couple minutes left, but like the Trail of Tears. These things are horrible. But what's interesting is that the Trail of Tears, the truth behind that is it was actually the Trail of Tears is when they forced Cherokees out of lands east of the Mississippi and transferred them to reservation properties. But what actually the truth of it, when you hear the history of it, the military had them at gunpoint and forced them to march, when actually it was Cherokee-led march on their own, and it was funded by Washington. The history is there. You can find it. So this, again...
And by the way, I don't think there's a nation on Earth that's currently in business today, and I think we've got 196 of them or something like that didn't at one point or another, either through conquest or through some other method, envelop the existing peoples that were on the land which is today there. I mean, every nation in the world at some point. This didn't just happen to the Native Americans.
Well, and keep in mind, if your friend who wants to give it back to the Native Americans, that also includes $200 trillion in debt. It also includes this border problem we got. It also includes, so this isn't so simple as that.
Right.
And what we're talking about is, because this is what we believe, that land was given to the Jews by God.
Exactly.
So
by God.
It very well could be that this land was also given to us by God.
Yeah.
And you're seeing the purpose maybe playing out in our lifetime. We may actually see this begin while we live here.
Oh, yeah. I think if you read Revelation chapter 18, it's talking about us.
I agree with you on that.
I do.
I do 100%.
Is that Mystery Babylon?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got 2 minutes left. Is there anything on your immense list of...
Yeah, Dave, you got to summarize all this in the next few minutes.
Yeah, you got about 90 seconds to summarize.
Well, we kind of the show summarized itself. I mean, I think there's a parallel between I think the prophecy of King Cyrus and that it came true, and the parallels we may actually be seeing a modern day Babylon being rescued by a modern day Cyrus in a very similar pattern, and to not pay so much attention to what you're seeing in media, on TV, social, all the attacks against this guy. Let's get through the inauguration, and who doesn't want the United States to be a better place?
No, I would argue the left.
Well, there's evil. There always is going to be, but
I mean, obviously Obama didn't, because he made it worse every year.
Well, and he's not done.
But we
Yeah,
are.
he's
We
still-
are.
He's trying to start a war, and I wouldn't be surprised if some newsworthy events pop up in the next 15 days.
Hey, Hoops, you going next door? Oh, wait.
Oh, you're not.
Okay, so this has been down the rabbit hole. The guy being